The amber glow of kerosene lamps flickered through the dusty windows of Dodge City's saloons as another restless night settled over the Kansas frontier. It was October 1886, and the cattle drives were winding down for the season, leaving behind a town thick with tension and whispered secrets. Eli Morgan sat alone at his usual corner table in the Long Branch saloon, nursing his third whiskey of the evening. At 43, his weathered face bore the map of a hard life, deep lines etched by prairie sun and sorrow, steel gray eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. The townsfolk called him the Loner, and he'd earned every syllable of that name. "Another round, Eli?" asked Martha Henley, the saloon's kind-hearted barmaid, her voice cutting through the haze of tobacco smoke and rowdy laughter. Eli shook his head slowly. "I'm done for tonight, Martha. Much obliged." As he stood to leave, a burst of drunken laughter erupted from a nearby table where three young ranch hands, Jake Brennan, Pete Lawson, and Billy Crenshaw, were deep in their cups and deeper in mischief. "I'm telling you, boys," Jake slurred, his voice carrying across the room. "That old hermit needs something to shake up his miserable life. Been walking around like a ghost for near on 5 years now." Pete leaned in, conspiratorially. "What you got in mind, Jake?" "Well," Jake's eyes gleamed with malicious humor. "Remember that Callahan boy? The one whose ma died of fever last week? Word is the kid's got no kin, nowhere to go. Sheriff Caldwell's been scrambling to find someone to take him in." Billy's face lit up with understanding. "You ain't serious?" "Dead serious," Jake grinned. "We dropped the boy off at Morgan's place tonight. Leave a note saying he's Eli's responsibility now. Can you imagine that sour old coot trying to handle a 6-year-old? The three men dissolved into laughter, their cruel plan taking shape as the whiskey flowed. None of them noticed Eli pause at the saloon doors, his jaw tightening as their words reached his ears. An hour later, Eli's modest cabin sat in darkness at the edge of town, surrounded by the endless Kansas prairie. The October wind whistled through the gaps in the wooden walls, carrying the scent of dying grass and the promise of winter. Eli had just settled into his worn leather chair with a book when a soft thudding sound came from his front porch. He froze, listening. Another thud, followed by muffled voices and the sound of retreating horses. Eli reached for his Colt .45, moving silently to the window. Through the glass, he could make out 3 figures on horseback disappearing into the darkness, their laughter echoing across the prairie. When he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. There, huddled against the wooden planks, was a small boy wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The child's eyes, wide and frightened, stared up at him like a cornered animal. A piece of paper was pinned to the blanket. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the note. "His name is Tommy Callahan. He's your problem now. Good luck, old man. Your friend's in town." The boy, Tommy, couldn't have been more than 6 years old. His dark hair was matted and dirty, his clothes little more than rags, but it was his eyes that hit Eli like a punch to the gut. They held the same hollow emptiness that Eli saw in his own reflection every morning. "Please, mister," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "I'm real cold." For a moment, Eli stood frozen in the doorway, memories flooding back like a dam bursting. Another child, another time, another life that had been ripped away from him. His first instinct was to march straight into town and dump the boy on Sheriff Caldwell's doorstep. He wasn't equipped for this. He couldn't handle this. But as Tommy shivered in the cold night air, something stirred in Eli's chest. A feeling he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick, and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story." "Come on inside, boy," he said gruffly, stepping aside. "Before you catch your death." Tommy scrambled to his feet and hurried past Eli into the cabin's warmth. The interior was sparse but clean, a stone fireplace, a simple wooden table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. Everything a man needed, and nothing more. "You hungry?" Eli asked, watching as Tommy's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. Tommy nodded silently. Eli moved to his small kitchen area and began preparing a simple meal of beans and hardtack. As he worked, he stole glances at the boy, who had positioned himself near the door, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. "What happened to your ma, son?" Eli asked gently, setting a plate of food on the table. Tommy's lower lip trembled. "She got real sick, started burning up with fever. Mrs. Henderson from next door said she went to be with the angels." His voice cracked. "But I don't understand why the angels needed her more than I did." Eli's throat tightened. He'd asked himself the same question 5 years ago when his own wife, Sarah, and their 7-year-old son, Daniel, had been killed in a Comanche raid while he was away on a cattle drive. Why did God take the innocent and leave the broken behind? "Sometimes," Eli said carefully, "life don't make much sense. But your ma, she's watching over you now. That much I know for certain." Tommy approached the table cautiously and began eating with the desperate hunger of a child who hadn't had a proper meal in days. As he ate, Eli noticed the boy's hands, small and delicate, but marked with calluses that spoke of hard work and harder times. "Those men who brought you here," Eli said, "they say anything to you?" Tommy shook his head. "They just laughed a lot, said I was going to be someone else's problem now." He looked up at Eli with those haunting eyes. "Are you going to send me away too, mister?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Eli studied the boy's face, seeing not just fear, but a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might want him. "Name's Eli," he said finally. "Eli Morgan, and I reckon we'll figure things out come morning." Relief flooded Tommy's features, and for the first time since arriving, he managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Eli." As the night wore on, Eli fashioned a makeshift bed for Tommy using blankets and pillows near the fireplace. The boy fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted by fear and uncertainty. But Eli remained awake, staring into the dying embers and wrestling with emotions he'd kept locked away for years. He thought about Jake Brennan and his friends, their cruel laughter echoing in his memory. They'd meant it as a joke, a way to torment the town hermit. But as Eli watched Tommy sleep, this small, vulnerable child who'd already lost everything, he felt something awakening in his chest. Not just anger at the men who'd used a grieving child as a pawn in their game, but something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to purpose. Outside, the October wind continued its mournful song across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of change. In the distance, a coyote howled, a sound both lonely and wild, echoing the emptiness that had defined Eli's existence for the past 5 years. But tonight, for the first time in half a decade, Eli Morgan wasn't entirely alone. And as he finally drifted off to sleep in his chair, he couldn't shake the feeling that this small, unexpected visitor was about to change everything. What he didn't know was that Tommy Callahan carried secrets of his own, secrets that would soon draw the attention of dangerous men and force Eli to confront not just his own buried past, but a web of deception that threatened to destroy everything he was beginning to care about once again. The boy's arrival was no accident, and the men who'd orchestrated it had plans that went far beyond a simple prank. In the shadows of Dodge City, wheels were already turning, and Eli Morgan was about to discover that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Dawn broke gray and cold over Dodge City, painting the prairie in shades of silver and rust. Eli woke to the sound of movement in his cabin, soft footsteps and the gentle clatter of dishes. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind until memory crashed back like a cold wave. Tommy stood at the small kitchen counter, carefully arranging the few dishes Eli owned. The boy had somehow managed to wash them in the basin, though water dripped steadily onto the floor from his efforts. "Morning," Eli said, his voice rough with sleep. Tommy spun around, startled. "I'm sorry, Mr. Eli, I just wanted to help. Ma always said—" He stopped abruptly, his face crumpling as the reality of his loss hit him anew. "It's all right, son," Eli said gently, rising from his chair. "You did good, real good." As they shared a simple breakfast of coffee and leftover biscuits, Eli studied the boy more carefully in the morning light. Tommy was thin, too thin, but there was an intelligence in his dark eyes that spoke of a quick mind. More troubling were the faint bruises on his arms, barely visible beneath his worn sleeves. "Tommy," Eli said carefully, "before your ma got sick, was there anyone else looking after you? Any men coming around the house?" The boy's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "There was Mr. McReedy. He came by a lot, especially after Ma started getting sick. He said he wanted to help, but—" Tommy's voice trailed off. Eli's blood chilled. Silas McReedy was Dodge City's most powerful land baron, a man whose wealth was matched only by his ruthlessness. What did McReedy want? He kept asking Ma about some papers, said they were important. Ma would get real upset and tell him to leave. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "The night before she died, she gave me something and made me promise to keep it safe. She said if anything happened to her, I should never let Mr. McReedy find it." "What did she give you, son?" Tommy reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn smooth by countless hands. "She said it belonged to my pa, that it would keep me safe." Before Eli could examine the pouch, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Through the window, he saw Sheriff Ruth Caldwell riding up with two of her deputies. Ruth was a formidable woman in her late 30s, one of the few female lawmen in Kansas, and someone Eli respected despite his general distrust of authority. "Eli Morgan," Ruth called out as she dismounted. "We need to talk." Eli stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between the sheriff and the cabin. "Ruth, what brings you out here so early?" Ruth's weathered face was grim. "Got reports that someone left a child on your doorstep last night. The Callahan boy. That true?" "Might be," Eli replied carefully. "Eli, I've been looking for that boy since his mother died. He's supposed to be in my custody until we can find proper placement." Ruth's tone was firm, but not unkind. "I need to take him back to town." "And then what? You gonna stick him in that orphanage over in Wichita? Boy's been through enough." Ruth sighed, removing her hat and running her fingers through her graying hair. "I know you mean well, Eli, but you ain't exactly equipped for child rearing. Besides, there's been some interest from respectable families." "What families?" "Well, Silas McReedy, for one. Says he knew the boy's mother. Wants to do right by the child." Eli's jaw tightened. "McReady's got no business with that boy." "Why? You know something I don't?" Before Eli could answer, Tommy appeared in the doorway, his small frame trembling with fear. "Please don't let him take me," he whispered to Eli. "Please." Ruth's expression softened as she looked at the frightened child. "Hey there, Tommy. I'm Sheriff Caldwell. I'm here to help." "The sheriff's a good woman, son," Eli said gently. "But maybe you could give us a day or two to sort things out, Ruth. Boy's been through a lot." Ruth studied Eli's face, noting something she'd never seen there before. Genuine concern for another human being. "All right," she said finally. "But I want to know what's got you so spooked about McReedy." Eli glanced at Tommy, then back at Ruth. "Can we talk private-like?" Ruth nodded, and they walked a short distance from the cabin. "McReady's been sniffing around the Callahan place," Eli said quietly. "Boy says he was pressuring his ma about some papers before she died. That don't sit right with me." "What kind of papers?" "Don't know yet, but I aim to find out." Ruth was quiet for a long moment, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "There's been talk, Eli. Rumors about McReady buying up land all along the railroad route. Some folks say he's got inside information about where the new spur line's gonna run. That'd be worth killing for," Eli said grimly. "You think McReady had something to do with Mary Callahan's death? Woman was healthy as a horse one week, dead of fever the next, and now he's mighty interested in her boy." Eli's voice was hard as granite. "I don't believe in coincidences." Ruth nodded slowly. "Give me 48 hours, but if McReady comes sniffing around official-like, I'll have to bring the boy in." After Ruth and her deputies left, Eli returned to the cabin to find Tommy sitting at the table, the leather pouch clutched tightly in his small hands. "She's gonna make me go with Mr. McReedy, ain't she?" Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not if I can help it," Eli said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "Tommy, I need you to show me what your ma gave you. It might be important." With trembling fingers, Tommy opened the pouch and withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Eli carefully unfolded it, his eyes widening as he read. It was a deed, a legal document granting ownership of a substantial piece of land to one Thomas Callahan Sr., dated 15 years earlier. "Your pa owned land, Tommy. Good land by the looks of it." Eli studied the description. "This here's prime territory, right where the railroad's planning to expand. Ma said Pa died in a mining accident when I was just a baby. She never talked much about him." Eli's mind raced. If Tommy's father had owned valuable land, and if that land had somehow passed to Mary Callahan and then to Tommy, it would explain McReady's interest. But it also meant the boy was in far more danger than Eli had initially realized. "Tommy, did your ma ever mention anyone else who might have known your pa? Any friends or business partners?" The boy thought for a moment. "There was a man who came to see Ma a few months ago. Real nice fellow named Mr. Harrison. He said he used to work with Pa in the mines. Ma seemed real happy to see him, but after he left, she got all worried and started hiding things." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. What did this Harrison look like? Tall with a beard, had kind eyes. But Ma said I shouldn't talk to strangers about him. Before Eli could respond, the sound of approaching riders filled the air once again. But this time, it wasn't the sheriff. Through the window, Eli saw 3 men in expensive suits riding toward the cabin, led by a figure he recognized all too well, Silas McReedy himself. McReedy was a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed despite the frontier setting, with cold blue eyes and silver hair that spoke of wealth and power. The 2 men flanking him looked like hired guns, hard-faced and dangerous. "Stay inside," Eli told Tommy, his hand instinctively moving to his gun belt. "No matter what happens, don't come out." Eli stepped onto the porch as McReedy and his men dismounted. "McReedy, you're a long way from your fancy office." "Morgan," McReedy smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "I hear you've got something that belongs to me. Don't recall you owning anything on my property. The boy, Morgan, Tommy Callahan. His poor mother asked me to look after him before she passed. It's only right that I honor her wishes." "Funny thing," Eli said, his voice deadly calm. "Boy tells a different story. Says you were bothering his ma, pressuring her about some papers." McReady's smile faltered slightly. "The child is confused by grief. Understandable, given his circumstances. But I'm prepared to give him a good home, proper education. Surely you can see that's better than this." He gestured dismissively at Eli's modest cabin. "What I see," Eli said, stepping closer, "is a man who's real interested in a 6-year-old boy for reasons that don't add up. Makes a man wonder what you're really after." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. McReady's hired guns shifted restlessly, their hands hovering near their weapons. But Eli stood his ground, his gray eyes locked on McReady's face. "I'll be back, Morgan," McReady said finally, remounting his horse. "With proper legal authority. You can't protect him forever." As the 3 men rode away, Eli felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. This was far from over. Tommy Callahan wasn't just an orphaned boy. He was the key to something much larger and more dangerous than a simple land grab. And somewhere in the shadows of Dodge City, other players were moving their pieces on a board that Eli was only beginning to understand. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Eli's cabin. Dr. Samuel Harrison stood at the door, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun. He was exactly as Tommy had described, a bearded man with kind eyes, though those eyes now held a weight of worry that spoke of sleepless nights. "Mr. Morgan," Harrison said, removing his hat, "I believe we need to talk about the boy." Eli's hand rested on his gun, but something in the man's demeanor suggested he wasn't a threat. "You the Harrison that knew Tommy's pa?" "I am." And if the boy is here, he's in more danger than you can possibly imagine." Eli studied the man's face, noting the genuine concern etched in every line. After a moment, he stepped aside. "Come in, but know that if you mean harm to that child, you won't leave here breathing." Harrison nodded gravely. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Inside, Tommy looked up from where he'd been sitting by the fire, his eyes widening with recognition. "Mr. Harrison, Ma said you might come back." Harrison knelt down to Tommy's level, his expression gentle but urgent. "Hello, Tommy. I'm sorry about your mother. She was a good woman who loved you very much." "Did you really know my pa?" Tommy asked, his voice small and hopeful. "I did, son. Thomas Callahan was my partner, and one of the finest men I ever knew." Harrison looked up at Eli. He was also murdered for what he discovered. Eli's blood ran cold. "Murdered?" Harrison stood, his face grim. 15 years ago, Tom and I were prospecting in the Colorado Territory. We found something, not gold or silver, but something far more valuable. A survey map showing the planned route for a major railroad expansion through Kansas. Tom realized that anyone with that information could buy up the land cheap and make a fortune when the railroad came through. "How'd he get the map?" Eli asked. "Tom saved the life of a railroad surveyor during an Apache attack. The man was dying, and he gave Tom the map as payment for trying to help him. Tom brought it back here to Kansas, bought up several parcels of land along the future route." Tommy clutched the leather pouch tighter. "Is that what's in here? The map?" Harrison shook his head. "No, son. Your father was smart enough to hide the original map somewhere safe. What you have there is the deed to the land he bought. Land that's now worth more than most men see in a lifetime." Eli felt the pieces clicking into place. "And McReedy found out about it." "Silas McReedy was Tom's business partner in those days," Harrison continued, his voice heavy with old pain. "When Tom showed him the map, McReedy wanted to use the information to buy up everything along the route. But Tom had a conscience. He said it wasn't right to profit from information that could ruin other folks' lives. So McReedy killed him for it," Eli said grimly. "Made it look like a mining accident. I was supposed to die too, but I was in town getting supplies when it happened. By the time I got back, Tom was dead, and McReedy was nowhere to be found. I tried to prove what happened, but McReedy had money and influence. I had nothing but suspicions." Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell Ma?" Harrison's eyes filled with pain. "I tried, son. When I found out where your mother had settled, I came to warn her. But she was scared. Scared that if McReedy knew she had the deed, he'd come after you both. She made me promise to stay away unless something happened to her. Well, something did happen," Eli said darkly, "and I don't think it was natural causes." Before Harrison could respond, the sound of galloping horses filled the air. Through the window, Eli saw Sheriff Caldwell approaching at full speed, her face a mask of urgency and fear. "Eli!" she called out as she dismounted. "We got trouble. McReady's got a court order. He's coming with a federal marshal to take the boy, and there ain't nothing I can do to stop it legally." Eli's jaw tightened. "How much time we got?" "Maybe an hour. He's gathering his men now." Ruth noticed Harrison for the first time. "Who's this?" "Someone with answers," Eli said. "Harrison, tell her what you told me." As Harrison quickly recounted the story of Tommy's father and the railroad map, Ruth's expression grew increasingly grim. "Even if all that's true, I can't arrest McReady on 15-year-old suspicions. And I sure can't stop a federal marshal." "Then we don't stop him," Eli said, his mind racing. "We disappear. Eli, you can't run forever. McReady's got resources, connections. He'll find you." "Maybe. But first, we're gonna find that map." Harrison looked up sharply. "You know where it is?" "Got an idea." "Tommy, your ma ever mention any special place your pa liked to go? Somewhere he felt safe?" Tommy thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up. "Ma used to tell me stories about a place Pa called his thinking spot. She said it was by the old oak tree where they first met, near the creek that runs behind the church." Eli nodded. "I know the place. If Tom Callahan hid something important, that's where it'd be." "Eli," Ruth said urgently, "even if you find this map, what then? You think McReady's just gonna give up?" No, Eli said grimly, but maybe we can make him wish he had. 20 minutes later, Eli, Tommy, and Harrison were crouched beside the massive oak tree that stood sentinel over Willow Creek. The tree was ancient, its gnarled trunk scarred by decades of prairie storms and scorching summers. Pa used to carve things in trees, Tommy said, running his small hands over the bark. Ma said he carved their initials when they got engaged. Harrison found them first, the intertwined letters TC plus MC carved into the trunk about 6 feet up. But as they examined the carving more closely, Eli noticed something odd. "This ain't just decoration," he said, tracing the letters with his finger. "Look here, the C in both sets of initials. They're deeper than the rest, and they're pointing downward." Following the direction of the carved letters, they found a small metal box buried beneath the tree's massive root system. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was the railroad survey map that had cost Thomas Callahan his life. "My God," Harrison breathed, studying the detailed markings. "This shows the entire planned expansion. McReedy could have made millions with this information." "Still can," Eli said grimly, "which is why he's been so desperate to get his hands on it." The sound of approaching riders cut through the morning air like a blade. In the distance, they could see a large group of men on horseback heading toward Eli's cabin. "They're early," Ruth said, having followed them to the creek. "Eli, you need to go, now." But as they prepared to flee, Tommy suddenly grabbed Eli's arm. "Wait," he said, his young voice filled with determination. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being scared. My pa died because he tried to do the right thing. Maybe it's time someone finished what he started." Eli looked down at the boy, seeing not fear, but a courage that reminded him painfully of his own lost son. "What are you thinking, Tommy? Mr. Harrison said the map shows where the railroad's gonna go, right? What if we told everyone in town? What if we made sure all the folks along the route knew what was coming?" Harrison's eyes widened with understanding. If the information became public knowledge, McReedy couldn't use it to cheat people out of their land. "But that'd mean facing McReedy head-on," Ruth warned. "He's not gonna just let you walk into town and expose his plans." Eli was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. Running would keep Tommy safe in the short term, but McReedy would never stop hunting them. Fighting back was dangerous, but it was also the only way to truly end this. "There's gonna be a town meeting tonight," Eli said finally. "Monthly gathering at the church. If we could get this information to the people—" "McReedy will try to stop us," Harrison said. "Let him try." Eli's voice was hard as iron. "I've been running from my past for 5 years. Maybe it's time I stood and fought for something worth fighting for." As they made their plans, none of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above, one of McReady's men who had been tracking their movements since dawn. The hunter had become the hunted, but the game was far from over. In the distance, the church bell began to toll, its bronze voice carrying across the prairie like a call to arms. By evening, the truth would be revealed, and Dodge City would never be the same. But first, they had to survive long enough to tell it. McReady's riders were closing in, and the final confrontation was about to begin. In his heart, Eli knew that before the sun set on this day, either justice would prevail, or everything he'd come to care about would be lost forever. The boy who had arrived as an unwanted burden had become the key to redemption, not just for a town, but for a broken man who had forgotten how to hope. The sun hung low over Dodge City as evening approached, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. The monthly town meeting was set to begin in an hour, and the church was already filling with curious residents. But in the shadows between buildings, McReady's men moved like wolves, positioning themselves for what their boss had promised would be the final act of this drama. Eli, Tommy, and Harrison had spent the afternoon carefully planning their approach. The railroad map was now safely hidden in multiple copies, thanks to the quick work of Edgar Whitman, the town's newspaper editor, who had agreed to help expose McReady's scheme after hearing their story. "Remember," Eli said to Tommy as they prepared to leave their hiding spot in the old grain warehouse, "once we get to that church, you stay close to me, no matter what happens." Tommy nodded, his small hand clutching the original deed to his father's land. Despite his youth, there was a steely determination in his eyes that reminded Eli powerfully of his own son, Daniel. "I ain't scared, Mr. Eli. Not anymore." Harrison checked his pocket watch. "It's time. Ruth should have the church surrounded by now with her deputies." But as they stepped out into the dusty street, they found their path blocked by Silas McReedy himself, flanked by 6 armed men. The land baron's usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his cold blue eyes burning with desperation and rage. "Going somewhere, Morgan?" McReady's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Only thing I got that's yours is a bullet with your name on it," Eli replied, his hand hovering near his gun. McReady laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You always were too sentimental for your own good. Did you really think you could waltz into that church and destroy everything I've built? I own half the people in this town, Morgan. The other half are too scared to cross me." "Maybe," Eli said calmly, "but you don't own the truth." "Truth?" McReady spat. "The truth is that Thomas Callahan was a weak man who couldn't see the bigger picture. Just like you. Just like his brat of a son." Tommy stepped forward, his young voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "My pa wasn't weak. He was good. And good always wins in the end." McReady's eyes fixed on the boy with predatory intensity. "Hand over that deed, boy, and I might let you live to see another sunrise." "The deed's already been filed with the territorial government," Harrison said, stepping protectively in front of Tommy, "along with copies of the railroad map and a full account of how you murdered Thomas Callahan." McReady's facade finally cracked, revealing the monster beneath. "You sanctimonious fools! Do you have any idea what you've done? That railroad expansion will bring prosperity to this entire region. I was going to develop the land properly, create jobs, build a future. By cheating honest folks out of their property," Eli said. "By murder and theft. By doing what needed to be done." McReady snarled. "And I'm not finished yet." He raised his hand, and his men drew their weapons. But before they could fire, the sharp crack of rifle shots echoed from the surrounding buildings. Sheriff Caldwell and her deputies had been waiting, and McReady's men found themselves outgunned and surrounded. "Drop your weapons," Ruth commanded, stepping into view with her rifle trained on McReady. "It's over, Silas!" But McReady wasn't finished. With desperate fury, he drew his own gun and aimed it directly at Tommy. "If I can't have what's mine, then no one can." Time seemed to slow as Eli saw the madness in McReady's eyes, saw his finger tightening on the trigger. Without thinking, Eli threw himself forward, shielding Tommy with his own body just as McReady fired. The bullet caught Eli in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. But even as pain exploded through his body, he managed to draw his own weapon and return fire. His shot was true, striking McReady in the chest and sending the corrupt land baron stumbling backward. McReady looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his shirt, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered, before collapsing into the dust. As the echoes of gunfire faded, Tommy knelt beside Eli, tears streaming down his face. "Mr. Eli, are you all right?" "I'm fine, son," Eli gasped, though his shoulder felt like it was on fire. "Just a scratch." Dr. Margaret Foster, the town's physician, was already pushing through the crowd that had gathered. "Let me through. Eli, can you move your arm?" As the doctor worked to stop the bleeding, Sheriff Caldwell was securing McReady's remaining men. The land baron himself was still breathing, but barely. "Get him to the doc's office," Ruth ordered. "He'll stand trial for murder if he lives." Harrison helped Eli to his feet, supporting his uninjured side. "You saved the boy's life," he said quietly. "He saved mine first," Eli replied, looking down at Tommy with something approaching wonder. "This little fella reminded me what it means to have something worth fighting for." An hour later, the church was packed to capacity as Edgar Whitman stood at the pulpit, reading from the copies of the railroad survey map. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd, many of whom owned land along the proposed route. "Thanks to the courage of young Tommy Callahan and the sacrifice of his father," Whitman announced, Every landowner in the path of the railroad expansion will now have fair warning and the opportunity to negotiate proper compensation. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Tommy, sitting in the front pew beside a bandaged but smiling Eli, blushed at the attention. "What happens now?" Tommy asked quietly. "Now," Eli said, wincing slightly as he adjusted his sling. "We go home, and tomorrow we start figuring out how to be a family." Tommy's eyes widened. "You mean you want me to stay? For real? If you'll have an old, beat-up cowboy for a guardian?" Eli said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "I can't promise it'll be easy, son. I'm still learning how to care about people again, but I figure we can learn together." Tommy threw his arms around Eli's good side, hugging him tightly. "I'd like that, Mr. Eli. I'd like that a lot." 3 months later, as winter gave way to spring, the changes in both Eli and Tommy were remarkable. The cabin had been expanded with the help of grateful townspeople, and what had once been a hermit's sparse dwelling was now a warm, welcoming home. Tommy was thriving under Eli's patient guidance, learning to read and write with the help of the town's schoolmarm, Miss Rebecca Hayes. More importantly, he was learning to trust again, to believe that he was wanted and loved. Eli, for his part, had discovered that healing came not from forgetting the past, but from honoring it while building something new. He still missed Sarah and Daniel terribly, but Tommy had shown him that love wasn't a finite resource. There was always room for more and a heart willing to open. The railroad did come through Dodge City, just as the survey map had predicted. But thanks to Tommy's courage and his father's sacrifice, the expansion brought prosperity to the entire community rather than enriching one corrupt man at everyone else's expense. Dr. Harrison had decided to stay in Dodge City, opening a medical practice and becoming a surrogate uncle to Tommy. Sheriff Caldwell had been promoted to territorial marshal, her handling of the McReedy case earning her recognition throughout Kansas. And Silas McReedy? He had survived his wounds, only to face trial for murder, conspiracy, and fraud. He would spend the rest of his life in territorial prison. His empire crumbled to dust. On a warm spring evening, as Eli and Tommy sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and purple, the boy looked up at his guardian with serious eyes. "Mr. Eli, do you think my pa would be proud of what we did?" Eli considered the question carefully, as he always did when Tommy asked about his father. "I think your pa would be proud that his son grew up to be brave and good, just like he was. And I think he'd be grateful that you found your way to someone who loves you. Do you really love me, Mr. Eli? Even though I'm not really your son?" Eli's throat tightened with emotion. "Tommy, blood doesn't make a family. Love does. And I love you more than I ever thought possible. You're my son in every way that matters." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eli reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. What had started as a cruel prank had become the greatest blessing of his life. Tommy had arrived as an unwanted burden and had become the key to redemption, not just for a broken man, but for an entire community. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of progress and prosperity built on truth rather than deception. And in a small cabin on the edge of Dodge City, a lonely cowboy and an orphaned boy had found something precious and rare, a family forged not by blood but by choice, courage, and love. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.